Tonight's story time with Jim is going to be about one of my oldest friends, a gentleman named Mark Girten. Now, I'm going to preface this by telling you that Mark had a nickname, Cornbread. Well, I guess he still does have that nickname. That's the way nicknames go, isn't it? But anyway, Mark had the nickname Cornbread. So we'll just leave that for a second. I remember the first time I met Mark was on a school bus my freshman year. I'm not real sure how old Mark was at the time. But anyway, him and a friend named Chris Green decided that they would come see me after school that day. They never showed up. So the next day on the school bus, I asked them, guys, thought you were coming to see me last night. And they said, yes, we were, but there was some crazy man wandering around out in your field with a machete. I said, oh yeah, that was my dad. He was clearing blackberry brambles. Anyway, that was a rather auspicious starting to a friendship. Now, back to the cornbread part. I was working in the dish room at a Mexican restaurant called Chi-Chi's. And the manager went to answer a knock at the back door, came over to the dish room, and he told me, he said, there's somebody named Biscuits and Gravy here to see you. I looked at Cecil and I said, Cecil, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, no, there's a guy at the back door, and he said his name's Biscuits and Gravy, and he's here to see you. So I go to the back door, and here I find my friend, Mark Girten, aka Cornbread. I talked to him for a minute, got settled what we needed to get settled, and I went back and I said, Cecil, that guy that you thought was named Biscuits and Gravy, maybe did he say his name was Cornbread? Cecil laughed, and I realized what had happened. Anyway, there were many adventures with Mark through the years. Most of them I don't know if I can tell. Not because I would be worried about telling them, because I don't think Mark would mind, and I wouldn't mind because, well, we're both changed and both older now. But there were other people involved with us, and I'm not sure how they would feel about me telling them. But anyway, there were many misadventures and adventures. There was the time Mark drove around a corner in front of me, and his tire just completely come off of his car. I do not know why. I do not know why the lug nuts were not tied down. All I know is the centrifugal force of going around the corner was enough for the tire to completely come off. Well, I suppose the wheel, not just the tire. But perhaps one of my funniest stories about Mark has to be the time there was a rather attractive lady in our neighborhood that I was a little bit smitten on, and she wanted to drive my car. Now, she had told me she drove her dad's truck and tractor around the farm, so I figured, well, if you drive a farm truck and a tractor, you have to know what you're doing driving a car. So it was after I let this young lady behind the wheel of my car, after we had probably been driving about a half mile or so on country roads at night, that Mark finally from the back seat said, hey, I've got a question, April. That was her name. He said, what do you turn on your birthday, 14 or 15? It was at this time I realized mistakes had been made. Another humorous story about Mark Girten, cars, and April was we were driving one time to go play tennis. And I decided, after I had passed the turn, that I would go ahead and continue to make the turn. We did rather well. The car slid one way, then the other. I was able to steer into the turns and get the car going straight again, I thought. Then the car decided to head at almost a 90-degree angle into the ditch, flip up on its end, and eventually rest on its hood. Now, I don't know how many times the car flipped. Some people said 1.5, some said 2.5. I just know there was a half involved because we were on the hood. Now, the humorous story here, well, we were all okay. I should say that in the first place. Uninjured. Well, there was a slight injury that, required a little bit of mending, but there were no stitches required, no cast or anything like that. But the humorous part was, as I'm laying on the hood of my car with it all crumpled up, the doors wouldn't open, so Mark decides he will kick out the back window to get out. I yelled at him to quit kicking out my window. Where were we? Oh yeah, Cornbread was kicking out my back window. I told him to stop. Yes, I realized at this point that it was sort of silly, that I'm laying on the hood of my car all crinkled up and almost destroyed, telling Mark to quit kicking out my back window. The other humorous part of it had to be when Mark started sniffing and said, "Hey, do you guys smell that?" My immediate response was, "What is it, gas? What are you smelling?" He says, "No, I think I just crapped my pants." Anyway, that was the humorous story of the car wreck me and Mark Girten were in. Hope you guys have enjoyed this little story about my friend Mark Girten, aka Cornbread.